بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وسيد الخلق أجمعين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. أما بعد, inshallah, today the lectures continuation of what we started from lessons of the stories of the prophets, and in the last lesson we stopped at the death of Adam alayhi salam. I was asked the question, where was Adam alayhi salam was buried, and the answer for that, there's differences in opinion. Some people said he was buried in the same place he descended to in Sri Lanka or India, and the most authentic narrations I've read and I've seen in a place called Jabal Abu Qubais in Mecca, and it's the same place where his wife Hawa was buried as well. Now, Adam alayhi salam, before he died, he gathered all his children and he reminded them about the beginning of time, about what has happened and how Iblis deceived him and tried to misguide him, and he reminded them to stay strong with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone with no one else with him. Now, during that time, one of his children was called Sheeth alayhi salam, and he was helping his father. Sheeth was born after the death of Abel, after the death of Habil. And the meaning of the word sheath is the gift of Allah in Arabic. So the word sheath is the gift of Allah, and they were very happy, the parents, of having him after the death of one of their children. And it means the gift of Allah. And the English pronunciation or the English wording of that is Seth. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ability to understand. There might be a bit far off from the English pronunciation, but I think it is Seth. So Sheeth or Seth alayhi salam, and the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be upon him. When the death of Adam alayhi salam came, he reminded his children about the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he told Sheeth alayhi salam to take over of the reminder, to be in charge, to take care of the children. Now, he did that, and he took care of the children of Adam alayhi salam, the grandchildren, the grandnephews, the nephews, and he kept passing the message and keep reminding them about what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said and the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. About a year later, Hawa, his mother, passed away as well, and he buried her the same way he buried his father, which we mentioned last time. He was taught that by the angels. And it's in the same place again as his father passed away. And he kept teaching them about what is halal and what is haram, reminding them all the time. And he was giving 50 chronicles or apartments by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam explained that in the hadith. Now, the Prophet Sheeth alayhi salam wasn't mentioned in the Quran. In the Quran there are prophets and messengers whom have been mentioned, whom names have been shown, and some of them weren't. Some of them mentioned in the hadith and the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam mentioned that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent 50 chronicles or parchments to Prophet Sheeth alayhi salam. And the people would follow the commands that came to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to him. And one of the most important rulings and regulations, there were two. Remember when we mentioned last time that Hawa was given birth to twins, and a male twin would marry from a female twin from the other twin, and so on. So the first ruling that came to Sheeth alayhi salam was no twin marrying anymore, because there was no need for it. Okay, the expansion of the children, and now there's so many, so cousins could marry from each other or from other cousins, rather than twins marrying from twins. And the second ruling that was given to Sheeth alayhi salam was to forbid the mixing with the people and the tribe of Qabil, Cain, who went to the valleys. We mentioned when Cain killed Abel, he took himself and his family and he went away, and they went down to the valleys and they lived in the valleys. And they stayed away. They would still worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but they stayed away from the Father, so they were far away from the guidance. So Cain was there, Sheeth alayhi salam was in the same place or high as his father was, and he was commanded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not to mix with them, and that was according to the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, Sheeth alayhi salam, generation after generation started to come. Some people would say that it happened during the life of Sheeth alayhi salam, but I didn't see anything to suggest that from the research I've done. After the death of Sheeth alayhi salam, one of his children called Anush took over of his duties of reminding the people. Now until then, people still worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But after the death of Anush, and there is no prophets, these were giving the duties by the father. So the father was given duty to one of his children to take over and to pass the message to the people. Shaitan found his gap there at that point. And he came to the people of Cain. And he came to them as resembling one of the people of Sheeth alayhi salam, or the people who are top or up in the hills. He came to them as a young man in need of a job, defected from these people. I've had enough of the hard work that I used to do with them there. I'm not happy with them, and I would come down and I work with you. And he was hired by the people of Cain. Now, Iblis, and I mentioned that before, the people of Sheeth alayhi salam, the men were good looking, very handsome. The women weren't, but the opposite was with the people of Cain. The women were very beautiful and good looking, and the men weren't. So when they saw this man coming, as he said, from the people of Sheeth, very good looking man, they thought, very, very happy. We have a defector here, we have somebody that we could use, and maybe more people would follow him. And they hired him, they gave him a job, and he was working very hard with them. But Iblis, he came to them, and remember what I said before. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to Iblis, bring your salt, your sounds to them. اجلب عليهم بخيلك وصوتك ورجلك وشاركهم في الأموال والأولاد وعدهم وما يعدهم الشيطان إلا غرورا. The scholars, all of them, in Mufassirin, agreed that the salt, the voice that's meant here was music and musical instruments. And Iblis would work during the day. At night, he would come out and start making some musical instruments, drums. Sometimes he makes whistling sounds. Sometimes he would make other horns to blow on, and so on and so on, and start to make these musical instruments, and he would use it. And the people were getting very, we've never heard these things before. The people of Sheeth must be very advanced, and technologically they're more advanced than us. And they were very, pulled towards it, and they would start listening to it. And Iblis was very clever in using it, in a way that he said to them and suggested to them, why don't we have a day of celebration that we could use this even more and enjoy it even more with dancing and so on and so on. And according to some narrations, Saturday was chosen. So subhanAllah, from that time until today, it is the same night that you see people going out, dancing, night clubbing and so on and so on. And it is being used until this day. that people would use Saturday night to enjoy themselves. They might have added Friday night as well, but from that time it was used as well. Now, Iblis started to make the noises started to go bigger and larger, and the people, some of the youth from the Sheeth alayhi salam started to hear these noises. So they started to sneak out and go down and listen from far away and watch the people dance and watch the music and so on. Would go back again and tell other youth, oh look, we've been there yesterday and we've seen what they were doing. They were really making some, they were having some fun there. We don't have any of that here. And they would go and ask their elders over there, why don't we go and join them? And they would say, the elders would say to them, because it is a command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You shouldn't go. And this is, again, one of the first steps of disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you start questioning the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We hear people nowadays saying, oh, why shouldn't I eat ham? If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told you not to eat it, you have to find the scientific research and go and search. Because in the end of the day, wallahi, if you go and look and find the answer scientifically, you would have wasted your time, because you would have found that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have told you something for your own benefit. And you would have wasted time and effort and money and resources to find an answer that was no need for it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He tells you not to do something, He tells you for your own benefit. When He tells you, for example, adultery nowadays, which is unfortunately expanding in such rate that is unbelievable. Why aren't we allowed to? Look at all the diseases that people catch nowadays because of adultery. HIV, and so on, syphilis, and God knows what kind of diseases and illnesses that they find it very difficult either to cure, or the person would be ill with it for the rest of their lives, even if it's suppressed. And in the end of the day, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has forbade, I will come to that in a minute as well. Now, the youth would go down, watch them. As I mentioned before, the women there would dance, and they were very beautiful and good looking. And the youth there were very impressed by what they see. Beautiful women there dancing and doing all the things that they want to see. And the women, they noticed the youth of Sheeth, or the youth who come from Sheeth's side, and they were very good looking men as well. So they started to expose themselves even further. And that was mentioned in the Quran. That part was mentioned in the Quran. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told the wives of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in Surah Al-Ahzab, وَلَا تَبَرَّجْنَا تَبَرُّجَ الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ الْأُولَى. Tabarruj is to show your beauties and expose yourselves to foreigners and strangers. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told the wives of the Prophet, do not show yourselves and do not expose yourselves the same way people have did it in the first period of ignorance. And that was the first period of ignorance. This is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was being disobeyed in His earth. And they started, instead of observing now, shaitan, they were first observing. It's the same like somebody who sits, and goes to an area in a certain country without mentioning a name, where women expose themselves in windows. And he goes, oh, I'm just going to, to tour around and have a view and all sorts and so on and so on. The first day he went and, just looked and come back and says, astaghfirullah. The second day, goes and asks questions. The third day, goes and knocks on the door and goes in. And that's it. Zina and a sin is being committed. And it's the same thing here. If you know that something is going to pull you towards the disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you should ignore it. You should avoid it. Why take the risk? Why take a risk? Wallahi, if you have a doctor coming to you and saying to you, by the way, I'm just warning you now, if you don't stop smoking, that you're going to kill yourself. and you say, I better listen to the doctor. I better listen to the doctor. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told you not to do things that harm your body, in the Quran. And you don't listen to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're told to avoid certain company because they pull us into sins and disobedient. And we still go ahead and do it. And so on and so on. So many examples that you could give that people do, which takes them to the extent of disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now these stood there first few days observing, and then after that they joined in, and after that one of the men from the tribes of Sheeth alayhi salam, when he went between the people of Cain, and he was so impressed and completely enthralled by the beauty of their women, he went and committed zina and committed adultery, and that was the first time adultery was committed on the face of this earth. The first time adultery was committed on the face of this earth was at that time when that was done. And they were really embroiled in that kind of actions, and they carried on to do it. And the people of Sheeth alayhi salam, the numbers started to dwell because people started to go down and join the disobedient, and the people of Cain became very aggressive in dealing with the believers. We see this happening nowadays, and they started to go towards them, fight them, and killing them, and so on and so on, and they completely ignored the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They left the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we see this happening nowadays. But what people forget, that although the Ummah, for example, is going through a very hard time and a very tough period, that we think that that's it, there is no way out. At that time these people have gone through the same, the believers. Because the non-believers surrounded them, they were attacking them, they went and they fought them, and we think that no good is going to come out whatsoever. It doesn't matter what we do. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent Idrees alayhi salam. In that time, that's it, the disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala started to completely take over. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent Idrees alayhi salam. Now Idrees alayhi salam came to the people at a time where they were completely lost. Completely lost. And the people of Cain would, go to the people of Sheeth alayhi salam and kill him. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent Idrees alayhi salam, and his name, actually at the original name, is called Akhnouch. The name's Akhnouch, that was the name that was given to him, but he was given the name Idrees because of the amount of worship he used to do towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he would read from whatever has been sent to him, or the prophets has left before him, and the righteous people. And he is Idrees, the son of Mihlabil, the son of Qinan, the son of Anush, the son of Sheeth, and the son of Adam alayhi salam. And he was born during the life of Adam alayhi salam, and he lived with him for 120 years. Idrees alayhi salam lived with his great grandfather for 120 years. Remember, we said Adam alayhi salam lived for nearly 1,000 years. And this is one of the reasons Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed him to see his grandfather and to be able to learn as well. And he was a very righteous person. He would worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a lot. And he was very patient, a very calm and wise person as well. And according to the narrations, he has a huge beard. And remember what I said about the size of these people at the time as well. And he would look at the earth while he was walking. He wouldn't look at people in pride. So one of the lessons we learn here as well of the righteous people, the amount of worship that they do towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That what brings them closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and makes them righteous. Secondly, following the sunnah. So the beard is not something that came nowadays or associated just with Muslims or extremists or fundamentalists or all that nonsense that we see coming out of Hollywood. No, it is practices from the times of creation, from the beginning of creation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taught the people. Secondly, lower your gaze. Lower your gaze. Remember what happened with the youth of Sheeth? They didn't lower their gaze. They completely got lost and embroiled in committing sins. Now, lowering the gaze is very important. Because if you lower your gaze, you keep your eyes to yourself, you're happy with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed you. A man who's married keeps his eyes to himself. If he starts looking and sees something that he might like, or someone that he might like, and he goes and looks at his wife and think, well, what I've seen today is more beautiful than you. But how do you know that what you see today isn't going to make your life more miserable? How could you do that? Giving away something that you already know and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed you with, you should be content and you should be happy and accept what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving to you and pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide you. Also Allah ta'ala Idrees alayhi salam liyaqdi ala shar. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent Idrees alayhi salam to completely wipe the evil and the destruction that the people of Cain have created on the earth, and he was the first which was given the fight in the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the command by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to fight in his sake, to stop the destruction of the people of Cain, and he was the first person to prepare armies and attack those people who were causing destruction in the earth. And he was so blessed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was the first human being to be taught how to write with the pen. So Idrees alayhi salam, the first person, first human being to be taught by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to write by the pen, and he taught his people as well to write and use the pen. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed him so much and raised his position so much that he mentioned him in the Quran, وَاذْكُرْ فِي الْكِتَابِ إِدْرِيسَ. And remember in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Idrees alayhi salam, إِنَّهُ كَانَ صِدِّيقًا نَبِيًّا. He was a truthful and he was a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَرَفَعْنَاهُ مَكَانًا عَلِيًّا. And we have raised him to a high position. And this is in Surah Maryam. If you look at it and read it, and the reason, there's a story behind it. There's a story behind it as well. That he was, that the angel of death came to take his life. Look at the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The angel of death, before the angel of death comes to take his life, the prophets were always, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala giving him such a high position, he would send a message to them to see if they are ready to go yet. Not straight away like us. Time comes, it comes. And he would ask if he could go and speak to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and go to the heavens and see if he could be, given more time to spend with his people. And this is one of the narrations, Allahu Allam, if it's correct or not, but he was risen to the heaven, and when he reached the fourth level of heaven, as it is 7 levels, when he reached the fourth level, the angel of death came and took his life there. And he took his life there. And he said to him, I was commanded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to come and take your life actually on that place, and I was waiting for you there. So that's one of the reasons his life was taken away, not in earth, but in heaven, and he was given that high position. We need to understand very important lessons here. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent prophets, sent messengers, giving us stories, giving us, lessons in the Quran. Some people in the beginning of this said stories. How could you say stories? And the Quran doesn't tell stories. But you know what? I said it before in the first lesson. فَقُصُصِ الْقَصَصَ لَعَلَّهُمْ tell them the stories and narrate to them the stories. And it is stories. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have called it in the Quran stories. So we can't call it any other name. And these stories came to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam during the time when Muslims were attacked, during the time when Muslims were tortured, during the time when Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was surrounded and he was under siege, as I mentioned in my khutbah, in Mecca, when his wife passed away, when his grandfather was severely made ill because of the siege and he passed away 6 months later, when he saw his dearest and nearest lose their lives because of what's happening, and then when he saw his companions being tortured, some of them being killed right in front of him, and he couldn't do anything to protect them because he did not want to harm the other people as well. He was hoping for them to accept Islam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will send them and narrate to him these stories of these prophets to remind the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam to be patient. That it's not just you who's been through these hardships. It's not just you. We're going to see inshallah the next is going to be the story of Prophet Nuh alayhi salam and the hardship that he's gone with his people. And after that, the stories as well will come of the other prophets. The story of Prophet Musa alayhi salam. A story that we will take so much lessons from it, that it's mentioned in the Quran so many times. Some scholars said, كَادَ الْقُرْآنُ أَنْ يُسَمَّى مُوسَى. Quran was actually about to be called Musa because of the amount of times the story of Musa alayhi salam was mentioned. We don't see the story of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned in the Quran. We don't see his life mentioned in the Quran because we have his life from the hadith, from the practice, from the narrations of the companions. But the Quran was there to remind us about the effects that the other nations had on themselves in their disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we see today, we talked about zina, the first time zina was committed. Last one time we talked about the first time, killing was committed. And we see nowadays in this ummah, people who commit atrocities, i.e. killing. We see people who commit adultery. We see people who engage themselves in homosexuality, which in Islam is haram, is forbidden. It's forbidden in Islam. And we see people involved in other activities, in interest, riba. And we see people involved in other sorts of illicit relationships, in illicit and illegal money laundering and all sorts of things. In this ummah, Muslims. That's why the Quran came to remind us about all these things. The Quran came to remind us where are the right things and what are the right things. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that from this ummah, there will be people who do all these sins. It's not just one. While the other nations were involved in one or two, subhanAllah, this ummah has gathered every single sin and they are doing it. And we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect all of us. But in the end of the day, there are lessons to be drawn from these stories, which if we go to them, read them, understand them, we will learn more and more and more. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless all of us, inshaAllah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gather all of us in paradise and Jannah with our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.